Hello and welcome to the Heights Baptist Podcast. My name is Lee and I'm one of the pastors here at Heights, and our mission is to love and to lead all people to a new life with Christ. And so our podcast is designed to help you take your next step of faith. And so sometimes we talk about matters of culture and then also matters of the Bible, and we look at theology and how that applies in our everyday living. And so what we're doing right now is a series through Mark, and we're kind of calling it Side Conversations. Mark Extended, right, Pastor Matt? Because I'm preaching through the book of Mark, but I'm only taking a sermon each chapter. And so that means we're not covering every verse of every chapter. And so what we're doing here at the back half of Mark is taking some of the harder passages that we don't maybe have time for on a Sunday morning to really talk about and digest. And so Pastor Matt Hogan is joining me today, who is our pastor of worship and media here at Heights. And are you excited about today? This is going to be a fun one.
This is going to be awesome. This is going to be Bible nerd-tastic today.
This may be one of our hardest ones I think we've done.
I think so.
I think this one is going to be a little challenging. So this is going to be interesting, because we even, we've been talking off camera, like, what are you going to say? What am I going to say? And I don't know if we totally agree on everything on this, which is okay.
Yeah.
We'll try to make it all work and hopefully make it sensible to our listeners here. So we are going to be in Mark chapter 13. So if you have a Bible, maybe you want to open or an app on your phone, Mark chapter 13. And Mark chapter 13 really talks a lot about the signs of the end of the age. Yep. And Jesus talks about the destruction of the temple, signs of the end. No one knows the hour and the day. That's the passage I'm going to be preaching in Mark 13. And I strategically picked the end of the chapter to preach that message, because what we had to skip on a Sunday morning is what's called the Abomination of Desolation.
Oh my gosh.
Right? And that's a mouthful in of itself. But this would also kind of correlate to Matthew 24. Is Matthew's kind of parallel passage. And so if you've got a Bible, Mark chapter 13, pick it up in verse 14 is where we are. And Jesus says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not be, let the reader understand. So that's always a fun phrase to put in there. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one enter his house, take anything out. Let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. Verse 17 says, for alas, women who are pregnant for those days, who are nursing, I lost my place, pray that it may not happen in the winter. For in those days there will be such tribulation as not been from the beginning of the creation of God, created until now, and never will be. And so that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Right? And so when he talks about abomination of desolation, an abomination is something that causes disgust or hatred. Desolation is the state of complete emptiness or destruction. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to kick this right over to you. What in the world does that mean? What's the abomination of desolation? Here's Matt Hogan just knocking this out of the park for us as scholars have debated this, roomfuls of books.
Context is key.
Yep, context is always key.
All right. So, just quick little life hack here. So, in my little Bible app that I'm using here, there's a little footnote where it says Abomination of Desolation, and I click on that, and it takes me to Daniel 9:27.
Right.
All right. So, just as a sort of a quick tip for those of us that are learning how to study the Bible, those little footnotes.
Yep.
Those can be helpful.
Yeah.
What is he talking about? Mark just said, "Let the reader understand." Well, I don't understand. Right. Well, let's click on Daniel 9. Where do we go? Where we go is we see in the book of Daniel. Daniel is describing another time in history where there's been this abomination that causes desolation.
Yeah.
Now, our best guess and our best understanding. There's scholarly debate about what Daniel's talking about too.
Right.
But what most likely Daniel is referring to is a time when Antiochus Epiphanes, he came out of Alexander the Great's empire, and he became the king who ruled over Israel for a time.
Yeah.
He actually desecrated the temple, and he did that by sacrificing a pig on the altar to Zeus.
Right.
And so that made the temple unclean
Yeah.
and unusable.
Right.
So it was an abomination
Yeah.
that caused desolation. It
Yeah.
was unclean, it was defiled, and it was empty because you can't use it.
Right.
Do you like the show Friends?
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys watch the show Friends. So one of my favorite episodes of the show Friends was when he did the Hanukkah armadillo. Do you remember that?
Right, yeah.
And he's trying to teach his kid about, there were these people called
The
Maccabees.
Maccabees.
Yeah. If you're familiar at all with the concept or the history of Hanukkah and the Maccabees and all that, these are all things that happen in between the Old Testament and the New Testament. That's when all of this happens.
Right.
And so in between, and that's what Daniel's talking about. That's the period of history that Daniel's talking about. So there's an abomination of desolation that happens, in between, Malachi and Matthew.
Yeah.
And then the Maccabees rose up, and there was a rebellion, and they got control of Jerusalem again, and they purified the temple, and they were able to use it again. But that's sort of where. That's the period of history that we're talking about. And so
Right.
Jesus is talking about when you see this thing.
Yeah.
And so what he's kind of talking about is like, you remember that thing that happened in our history that Daniel's talking about is going to happen again.
Right.
I think that's what he's telling his disciples.
Yeah.
Be prepared for something like that to happen again.
Yeah.
So of course the big question that we're left with in our mind is, when
Right.
is Jesus talking about? Is he talking about something that's going to happen, something that's already happened in history,
Yeah.
or something that's going to happen in the future?
Yeah, and that's good because you can read Daniel 9 and Daniel 12 is another one of these prophecies where you read it in kind of a future point,
Right.
and it points us to an antichrist to come.
That's still yet to come.
Yeah, the antichrist to come. And Daniel 9, he makes a deal with Israel and kind of helps them, rebuild the temple, and there's peace and there's sacrifice. And then he, 3.5 years in, breaks the deal, and that's Daniel chapter 12. And so you brought up a good point. And this is, again, I think where, as we said last episode, a good study Bible helps us in reading. BibleHub.com, Blue Letter Bible, these are free tools out there. GotQuestions.org. Because we want to try to set the context. We want to try to understand a little bit of what's going on, and there is some debate of what's happening. And so you mentioned, like, has Mark 13 happened, or is it going to happen? And so there's two views on that. So what's the view called that? All right, this has happened.
All right, so usually you'll use the word preterist for that. Usually when you talk about preterist, means something that's happened in the past.
Right.
And that's a view that says what Jesus is talking about with his disciples in Mark chapter 13 and also Matthew 24 is he's talking about basically what's going to happen when the temple is destroyed in 70 AD.
Right.
And there's a lot of things that Jesus is talking about, when he says, hey, no stone is going to be left unturned.
Yeah.
40 years almost to the day of when Jesus is saying this, the Romans come in because Israel rebels again,
Right.
just like they did under the Maccabees.
Yeah.
And they're sort of thinking, well, we did it to Greece, we can do it to Rome, but they were
No.
not able to do it. No. Rome
Yeah.
came in and crushed them.
Yeah.
And they literally took the most incredible structure, which was the temple that Herod the Great built, one of the wonders of the ancient world, and literally just obliterated it.
Right.
No stone left upon another.
Yeah.
And if you go to Israel today, you can go up to a structure that's basically the retaining walls that Herod built around the temple, but the temple itself is gone, and was never rebuilt.
Right.
And so people point to that. People point to the fact that the fall of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, is saying, these were things that were fulfilled, within the apostles' lifetime,
Right.
like Jesus is talking about.
Yeah.
So that would be what we would call a preterist interpretation of this passage.
Right. No, and that's good. So just a little word that people can throw out in their life groups or casual conversations.
That's right.
That lets the people know they listen to the podcast. We take the preterist view on this, But there is another view, and it's the futurist view.
Right.
Which is essentially these things haven't happened and they are going to happen. So this is pointing us the abomination of desolation, which can mean a person or a structure. You know, like you referenced the pigs being sacrificed on the altar. So folks who, like myself, take Mark 13 and read through a lot of a futurist view, saying these things are going to take place. This is going to be the work of the Antichrist one day to fulfill the prophecies out of Daniel 9. He makes a covenant. He breaks the covenant. You know, he does something in the temple, whether he destroys it or he sets up the mark of the beast. I mean, obviously, when you read the book of Revelation, you know that he demands the worship of the world. And so that view is going to be kind of the futurist view. These things are to come. They are going to happen type thing. I don't know, Darryl, but there's a third option.
Yeah, and the third option I think is really interesting, which is it's possible a lot of times in biblical prophecy,
right?
You have sort of an initial fulfillment, and then you have a later fulfillment.
Yep.
You know, I'm thinking especially about some of the things that Isaiah has to say, the prophecies that are made about Jesus.
Right.
You know, behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son. You will call his name Emmanuel, and he goes on to describe probably a person who actually lived in Isaiah's day.
Right.
But we also see through history, we also see that he's also prophesying forward to the coming of Jesus. Right. And so it's possible that, you know, history has a tendency to repeat itself. You know, and I think one of the things that might be happening here is Jesus is saying, you know, Antiochus destroyed the temple, right? You know, in that period in between the Testaments. So a few hundred years ago from their perspective. Yeah. Okay. And the Romans are gonna be coming in soon, and it's gonna be destroyed again. Yeah. You know, but then maybe there's still another kind of phase of this that may still be in the distant future that's still in our distant future. Right. Right. So it's possible that there may be a fulfillment that did happen in 70 AD, and also another fulfillment that's yet to come.
Right, and I'm comfortable with that view too. You know, I lean more toward the futurist, but to understand the historical context of those things, you know, Matthew 24, Mark 13 doesn't talk a lot about it, but you know, there's rumors of wars, and there's earthquakes, and there's, you know, these natural disasters. Well, of course, those have happened. They're happening. They will happen. And when Jesus brings that up in Mark 24, he talks about the increase of frequency of them, kind of giving the illustration of labor pains. Yep. You know, the labor pains get harder, they get stronger, they get, you know, closer together. Yep. Before birth happens, you know. And so when we look at that, we can go, yeah, all right, you pointed out a couple of historical times those things happen. But then as we're reading through the New Testament, we're reading through Revelation, we can go, ooh, it's going to happen, you know. So then how does that make us, what does that do for us today? You know, I mean, again, we're at breakfast, we got the Bible open, we're reading, we go, what in the world did I just read? Like, it's a Monday, it's early, and now how do I react before I get into Houston traffic if I've read this passage on the Abomination of Desolation? So
I think that we have a tendency to, when we get bad news in our world, especially when it comes to things like war, right, natural disasters, pandemics, we have a tendency to kind of run to the come quickly, Lord Jesus. Like, oh my gosh, it can't get any worse than this. It's got to be any minute now. Yeah. Okay. Now there's two sides to that feeling. On the one hand,
I think I know where you're going with this. Yeah.
We want to live every minute of our day like Jesus is coming back any minute. Yeah. Because that means we want to live for Christ. You know, Paul says, you know, make most of the time because the days are evil. Right. On the other hand, it's been a minute.
Yeah. You
know, the Lord in his grace and in his patience has waited 2,000 years. Right. You know, and there may be some more time to come. More opportunities for us to reach other people for the gospel. Yeah. But it's hard to reach other people for the gospel if we take ourselves out of the world.
That's good.
What Jesus is saying in Mark chapter 13 is that there is gonna come a time where you may have to run for your life. Right. You know, and I was hearing one one scholar was doing a podcast about this passage, and he said, one of the things that was interesting is when the Romans finally came into to Jerusalem in 70 AD, there weren't a whole lot of Christians,
Right.
because the Christians kind of trusting in Mark chapter 13, they got out of Dodge.
Yeah.
And the Jews were annihilated, and the Christians went all over the world and brought the gospel to every tongue and tribe and nation.
Right.
So what we have to understand is we're still in the birth pangs.
Yeah.
That we're still in the beginning of the end.
Right.
And so we need to continue to be faithful.
Yeah.
Even when we hear things on the news and on the world stage that might be scary.
Oh, and that's good. And I agree with that, because and again, when you read it through the futurist viewpoint, or kind of that middle option, third option, where yes, some things have happened historically, but these things are still going to happen. We have to understand it's going to get worse before it gets better. Mm-hmm. It just period. That's what Jesus is saying. And I don't mean that as doom and gloom, because we read the end of the book and Jesus wins.
That's right.
Even though it's going to be hard, it's going to get worse, Jesus still wins. He's already won, and so I kind of, explain it like this sometimes. It's like he comes into the locker room before you go out for the Super Bowl, and he's like, hey guys, you're going to win. Just go play the game. It's going to get tough at times. Halftime, you may be down and feel like you're ready to quit, but you're going to win. Just go, And so when you look at the news and, you see everything happening, I think we have to keep that in context of the victory's already won, and I still have a mission. The church is always God's plan A for getting the gospel out. And so we kind of talked off camera of what might it look like in the future when Jesus says, flee to the mountains or this. That may mean the church in America goes underground at some point. Mm-hmm. That may mean at some point in our future, we can't meet publicly at 9 a.m. or 10:30 a.m. Shameless plug for our worship services at this point. That just may mean that. But that doesn't mean the gospel stops. That doesn't mean we stop worshiping. That's not the end of us if we can't worship publicly, openly. Because the church throughout our world in spots is thriving underground.
That's right.
And so I think we can take courage to know, man, it may get harder before it gets better, but by golly, when Jesus comes back, it's going to get better.
That's right.
For all of eternity. And so, like you said, come quickly. Tuesday's good. I'm ready.
Yeah, and let's not. And again, Peter talks about, in his letter, he's like, man, what is taking so long?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I thought Jesus was going to come back.
Yeah,
and
I thought he was going to do this.
I thought this thing was going to happen.
Yeah.
And we're still hanging in there. But but the Lord is not slow,
right,
as some count slowness. But he is patient, desiring that all come to repentance.
That's good.
And so we don't want to be a people to take ourselves. We don't want to hide our light under a bushel.
Right.
We don't want to disengage from culture prematurely.
Yeah.
There may come a day where we have to.
Yeah.
There may come a day where we're forced underground.
Right.
But for right now, man, let's reach as many people with the gospel. Think of all the number of people throughout the last 2,000 years that have had the opportunity to hear the good news of Jesus Christ and give their lives to the Lord. Think about that number of people that have been saved because the Lord has been patient, and so I would say there's going to be days where I'm grieved because of something that's going on in our world, or even something that's going on in my family, and I want to say, "Come quickly, Lord Jesus."
Yeah,
and that's okay because that's how John ends the book of Revelation.
Right.
Come quickly, Lord Jesus. But there's another sense in where I say, man, the opportunities for folks to be saved because the Lord is being patient.
Yeah.
And so let's get out there and let's engage with our culture, and let's have those gospel conversations. Let's get folks, let's connect with our folks in our 4x4 plan and get the good news out there while we can.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. And I think that's a good place to end. So hopefully today that cleared up a little bit of what the Abomination of Desolation is. I know there's just a lot of good stuff on that, and that's a tough passage. But what we like to do here at Heights is tackle those tough passages, whether it is in a sermon or in a podcast podcast form because we believe it's in the Bible, and so we need to have those discussions. And so I want to thank you so much for joining us. We're going to continue this series in Mark, kind of post sermon discussions. So our next one will be in Mark 14, and we're going to be looking at the Garden of Gethsemane in the way Christ is praying and how he's struggling with this going to the cross, and could he have opted out, or what? Did Jesus have to die on a cross? And so I'm going to ask you to tune back in for that podcast coming out very soon. If you are in our area, we'd love to see you in person on a Sunday morning at 9 a.m. or 10:30 a.m. You can also join us online if you maybe are not in our area at 9 a.m., 10:30 a.m. on our Facebook page or our YouTube page. Find out more about our church at heightschurch.org. And until we see each other again, I hope you have a wonderful week where you are, and God bless.